live. This also is going to be a video and a podcast. So any future audience, we are glad that you are listening to this discussion as well. We will be very much, if you that are present here and today, will be also participating at the event, and there are a couple of options to do it. If you are here in Zoom, please write a question into the Q&A chat bar. We will be receiving that. Also, if you're on Facebook or any other platform, please write it there. We are going to connect it and get the questions over here as well. And we also received a couple of questions in advance with registered participants, so we will try to answer that as well. We will try to incorporate it within the discussion to keep it as dynamic as possible. Before we start the discussion, let me give a floor to a coordinator of the Democracy and Foreign Affairs program, policy program of the Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung, Ms. Kateřina Boťová, who is joining us today and who will give us some kind of framework also for this discussion and a short introduction. Kateřina, floor is yours.
Thank you, Lucia. Good afternoon. It is my great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Heinrich Böll Foundation, and I'm really very happy that together with our long-term partners, Europolicy and EURACTIV, who I would like to thank, and together with our distinguished guests, we are about to open today's discussion about feminist diplomacy in Central and Eastern Europe. Our foundation works as an international network and aims at supporting gender equality worldwide because we perceive it as a fundamental value for a democratic society, and it applies for foreign policy and security as well. And in recent years, we have started cooperation with the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy in Berlin, and we have looked into how the feminist approach could be useful for the foreign and security policy, which has been traditionally very masculine and elitist. And in my opinion, this approach brings many fresh ideas and it challenges the established order. And that's exactly what we need in order to move forward to a more peaceful world. And I'm sure that our guests will talk about specific details of feminist diplomacy. But what I would like to stress at this point is something that is appearing in almost every discussion about gender issues. And I believe that we can't avoid it even in today's debate. And that's the question of care. Because very often when we speak about problems such working conditions in diplomacy that do not suit women, we forget about men. And as long as care is provided predominantly by and expected from women, I think that it will be impossible to fight inequalities that are present in diplomacy and armed conflicts and peace processes. So I wish for the future more inclusiveness in foreign policy diplomacy and in care. Enjoy the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Kateřina, and also for specifying the care and also pointing out that this is about the fundamental values that we are all trying to incorporate into the debates on foreign policy. In order to kind of also give some background on what we are going to talk about today, and we have already mentioned that it's a feminist foreign policy that made to many and still to many is sounding quite scary. This concept needs a little bit of introduction. We at EURACTIV wrote quite lengthy policy paper, which is in Slovak, but it's still available, especially for the Slovak, maybe Czech audience to be read, which is giving some details about what it is, feminist foreign policy, what tools are being used, and so on. So let me just very briefly give some introduction to it. Kateřina already mentioned the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy, which is in Berlin, and they are very much active in the area, and they are constructing the feminist foreign policy, or FFP. You will hear probably a lot of FFP today, as a political framework which is centered around well-being of marginalized people. And in many cases, marginalized people are women. And this policy or political framework is also invoking processes of self-reflection, which is a very important point at the feminist foreign policy, and self-reflection regarding the foreign policy's hierarchical global systems. We have already kind of framed it in advance. Either Center for Feminist Foreign Policy or many other institutions, many academicians are very much concentrating or so-called 3 R's. It's somewhat pillars of even of Swedish, for instance, a feminist foreign policy, and many representatives of that policy are talking about them. It is not about only representation, because often when we say feminist foreign policy is about making equalities at the level of ambassadors so that this even number of women and men. This is not all. This is one part, but it's definitely not all. So the representation in all levels, and also when executing the policy, is very important R pillar that we have. The second R is the right, or rights, women's rights, which should be implemented, again, not only within the institution or the system, but also when executing the foreign policy. And the third pillar of the feminist foreign policy, or the R in 3 R's, are resources. So foreign feminist policies trying to ensure that the resources that are given or dedicated to certain policies are equally distributed, that they are not omitting marginalized people, that when we are supporting, for instance, education in the country, which is at the first place excluding women and only educating boys, we are actually advancing and helping to widen in some ways the gap between boys and girls in the education. So the resources and the intelligent spending of the resources targeted is also an important pillar. We will hear from Sweden. Sweden was the first country to accept and kind of announced that it's going to be led by the feminist foreign policy. But there is also Canada, France, Luxembourg, and partially also Mexico, which are having those elements incorporated in their in their foreign policy, that they are calling for it. They have also strong leaders who are announcing it, and publicly in many international forums, they are talking about the elements of it. European Union doesn't call its foreign policy anyhow feminist, but there are some elements, again, which is trying to execute. Very important was a year ago a report on gender equality in EU's foreign and security policy, which was accepted, which had been accepted by the European Parliament. And upon that report, the Commission created an action plan, EU Gender Action Plan number 3, which is supposed to kind of focus on particularly which we call feminist, but female-friendly or marginalized, focus on not excluding the marginalized groups kind of policies in foreign relations. For instance, the report of the European Parliament is explicitly talking about the feminism, for instance. That's an interesting part, because as probably we will hear also from our guests, sometimes the feminism itself is having a bad connotation. That's why, on one hand, it may spark some joy at some, but at the others, it can spark rather an aggressive discussion, because still it seems that not everyone is familiar with the concept. So European Parliament was at that point brave enough to bring that word, F word, they call it, into the discussion. So just to give an overview of what is the main core topic of today, and we will divide it again, maybe into these 3 pillars that we said, as we said that it is. At the beginning, we will talk about women in diplomacy and the representation and their challenges. Secondly, we will talk about the inclusiveness in foreign policy and maybe the rights of women that are trying to be part of feminist foreign policy. And thirdly, the resources, or how kind of change the minds of leadership as well as public to persuade that all the academic studies, all the researches that are in front of us, that are lying on our table, that they actually make sense, and that their execution would be beneficial for everyone, not just for women, for the whole society. So that's enough from me. And let's go to introductory words of our panelists. And I would like to know a little bit more into details what each of your institution or organization is doing within the framework. And then particularly, let's start with Ms. State Secretary. And my question for you to ask at the introduction is, what are the activities of the Slovak Ministry of Foreign Affairs to incorporate really more women and perhaps marginalized groups to the MFA structures? Because this is some kind of where we shall all start from.
Thank you very much, Lucia. And first of all, best regards to all of you from Bratislava. Good afternoon to all of you. And I would like to say at the beginning that I'm very pleased that I would like to thank EURACTIV for bringing this debate to the discussion, that to have the opportunity to discuss this very important topic. When I became the State Secretary at the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs the last year, I felt, and I'm still feeling very strongly, that as a woman State Secretary with the political position at the Ministry, that this is, I very much hope that this will be the mission possible for me, not mission impossible, that really to improve the conditions and the state of play of women in diplomacy at our ministry. Maybe I would like to start with two kind of, maybe I will be a devil advocate, but you have mentioned already that the terminology, the feminist diplomacy, might be seen very often as a controversial terminology. So I don't know whether this whether we will play in our case with the term feminist diplomacy, because I'm not sure whether that would fly in Slovakia. But maybe it would be good to hear from our Swedish friend, Swedish colleague, that what the communication strategy could be to have to reach the positive connotation of this terminology. Also, when it comes to the terminology, I think it is a little bit about the equalizing genders versus equalizing opportunity for both genders. And my third remark, introductory remark, is that I would welcome men in this panel. Right, we very often complain that there are only men in the panel to discuss certain topics, but this is example, and certainly this topic would require the engagement of men more, because I feel very strongly, and this is our communication strategy in our ministry, that this is not this is about the building better corporate culture, building better atmosphere, mutual respect, better working conditions for both genders, for an inclusive environment at the ministry. So, because like the military, diplomacy has a history of male domination, and even there has been an attempt to bring the to help women in their career. And even there is a number of women in formal diplomatic positions. There are still, in average, only 80. There is still, in average, 85% of ambassadors men, and 90% of negotiators are men. So I think that's a clear signal that we need to do something about the building awareness, and we need to do some practical steps. Some countries are much. They have done quite a good progress, and you have mentioned, Lucia, several cases, countries like Sweden, Mexico, Luxembourg, France. So I really take this debate as a good source of inspiration. That what are the good practice? What could be the inspiration for our case? Because I strongly feel that Slovakia, in spite of implementation of some concrete steps at our ministry in the last months, we are still at the beginning, and we would need to look around at what could work and how could we be inspired by examples from other countries. But I see the feminist diplomacy as you said, two pillars of it. First pillar, I would say, is more internal, the communication in the ministry, in diplomacy, and internalization, sensitization of the problem. So it is about the three R's, rights, women's rights, representation, and resources. And the second pillar of the feminist diplomacy, as we see it, is the compliance, the instruments and tools in foreign policy, what could be used in foreign policy to empower women. And official development assistance is a very good tool. EU framework is a good tool. Engagement of Slovakia or other country in different activities of various international organizations like the UN, OECD, and so on. So really the compliance with some resolutions and some action plans, like for example, in case of external foreign service of European Union, recently the gender action plan number 3. So these are tools that this is the second pillar of the feminist policy. But I think that, and I believe that we all would agree that every society and every organization benefit hugely from equality, diversity, and inclusion. And for us, this is the starting point for our approach. And in the last months, we have managed to significantly increase the representation of women, or to advance the position of women more to the decision-making positions at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and to increase the numbers of women ambassadors. But slowly, but it is improving. But and here I will conclude my introductory remark, is that in our case, in case of Slovakia, this is not only case of diplomacy and Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This is a societal issue. When we started to realize, to implement some steps and to organize some activities, I strongly felt that sensitization, that who else if not the Ministry of Foreign Affairs could be the good tool and instrument to sensitize the whole society. So I'm very proud that we implemented some steps, and maybe later I can mention very concrete activities what we organized recently. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. And also I will be certainly asking for the concrete steps, because there are a couple of them, and maybe State Secretary sounded a little humble, but really the last couple of weeks, the advancement really occurs, and she really has been doing a marvelous job for promoting this. So we will definitely talk about it. I would like to also address one more point, which is the full womenal, if we don't have a menal over here. We certainly were thinking of it, and I'm very glad that you're bringing it up, because when I am often moderating, not anymore, but in the past when we were moderating menals, it never came up, and now suddenly we're here, all women, suddenly right away we see it, because we know how it goes. Here we were thinking, let's strategize, because this is the first time we are talking about it. And then we go a step further. But I absolutely agree with you that the inclusivity is the main topic over here. So in order to see also how the things are already running in feminist foreign policy, we will go to Stockholm, I assume, to Sweden. Actually, I've mentioned it. Sweden has already been practicing a feminist foreign policy for almost 7 years. Margaret Wallström, as a Minister of Foreign Affairs, introduced it. We actually had an interview with Miss Anne Burns, who was a commissioner or how do you say, ambassador of the ambassador for the feminist foreign policy of Sweden, and she was saying exactly that when discussing whether to name the policy feminist, they were thinking, is it going to be too controversial? And then Margaret Wallström said, okay, let it be controversial. At least we will discuss it. So maybe you can, Ms. Grandin, address this and talk about what have been achievements, and maybe let's at this point look into how you managed to get where you are today.
Thank you very much, Lucia, and thank you so much, State Secretary. Very nice to meet you virtually, at least. And thank you for letting Sweden have this possibility to talk about our feminist foreign policy. And as you said, our policy was launched in 2014. So we've been going on with this policy for more than 6 years now. And of course, I mean, to all of us, I think we know that this is based on the fundamental notion that peace and security and sustainable development cannot be achieved if we leave half of the population outside of this building societies. And as you also mentioned, our policy is based on the method or the saying or whatever you want to call it, on the 3 R's. And we have found it to be very effective. We always start with the rights. I mean, women's and girls' full enjoyment of human rights. And there are no special rights for women and girls. They have the same human rights as everyone. So we're very particular about that. And then the representation, as we've been talking about, and the resources. And I think as State Secretary was highlighting the word feminism, of course, maybe Sweden is in a position where internally and nationally we have since long a gender equality, strong gender equality policy even internally. But I think it has been important for us to explain that feminism for us is nothing else than women's and girls' human rights. I mean, this is the job we should have done the last century. I mean, it's incredible that half of the population do not have the same rights, even legally in some countries. So it's very simple. It's about women's and girls' human rights. It's about their representation, their right to be represented, and about equal distribution of resources. So I think we always are very thorough to explain that it's nothing more complicated than that. That being said, of course, in Sweden, we can have large debates with our CSOs and with academia on different interpretations of words and so on. But in the feminist foreign policy, it's very, very simple. It's those 3 R's. And then when it comes to the other countries, we're very proud because we were the first country, and you have already mentioned that we now see Canada, Luxembourg, France, Spain. You forgot to mention them also.
Yes, and also Ambassador was writing to us. Thank you.
Yes, exactly. So of course we're hoping for someone in the more of the Eastern European sphere and other continents, of course. But also, I mean, we see the structural gender discrimination in every society. There's no question about it, and including in, of course, in Sweden when it comes to a lot of issues on the gender pay gap and even taking care of children. All these issues, and the violence is as present in Sweden as in other countries. So that's why we have a feminist foreign policy, but that's also why we have a feminist government. And I think you touched upon that. Having internal national policy on gender equality reflects the foreign policy, but also the other way. As I think you were referring to, State Secretary, that maybe we could start being more progressive one on the other, and then the other would also come. So I think that's for us has been very essential to lean back on our gender equality policy nationally, and also to learn from that in the foreign policy and vice versa. So we have a very fruitful cooperation with our national gender equality unit in the ministries also. And a lot of countries are also interested in national examples of gender equality work. And then I also was asked to maybe say a little bit about the results on the Swedish feminist foreign policy. I will just have some examples here. We can talk more about them later maybe, but on the representation issue, for instance, we have pushed very much for the women, peace and security agenda in the UN when we were temporary chairs in the UN Security Council, and now we're also sharing the OSCE. So we're pushing for those issues there. And of course, one more progressive and maybe controversial issue that Sweden is pushing for is the sexual and reproductive health and rights issues. So we are kind of champion that, because we see in the world we need countries who push for those progressive issues, and Sweden should certainly be one of them. We're also pushing for women's economic empowerment, and this has to do, for us at least, with the building of a welfare society. Women on the labor market earn money. Women on the labor market need childcare, and they need social protection systems that are available for a lifelong journey, from pensions to childcare and so on. And I'm happy that you brought that up earlier. And for that reason, we also took a part in the Generation Equality Initiative of UN Women, and then we are engaged as leaders in the coalition on economic gender equality, and we're pushing for issues like social protection, childcare, women's role in the labor market, but also other issues like the feminist trade policy, making trade work better for women and men, which it isn't today. And lastly, not to talk too long, I would like to also mention our internal work. And as you said, I mean, this reflects also women's role on the labor market nationally. I mean, if we don't have rights to childcare or equal pay nationally, it's hard for diplomats to have it, of course, in the diplomatic corps. But to really work for those issues, to make it possible for men to accompany their maybe women diplomats, for them to have good terms in terms of pay and childcare is really important, and we worked with that for long in the diplomatic service. And also the representation issue is not invalid. I mean, to see women as role models, as we have been doing for quite some time now in the foreign service here, is really important for young female diplomats to see State Secretary Brocková, for instance, having her role. I mean, this is so important. And in the diplomatic program, when we recruit, we of course see to it that it's half-half. And then we're working a lot with the management positions on middle level right now, because on the higher level, we now have the 50-50 actually. So we're very happy about that. But the middle level is kind of what recruits the next level. So we always have to work with those issues also. But I think I'll stop there for now, and we can have other questions. Thank you.
Definitely, and we will also look for the concrete examples how the implementation was going on, how were the challenges in the past, and what actually changed after 7 years of implementing the policy. Míla O'Sullivan is a researcher, and you've been researching on the female foreign policy for a couple of years. You are very active in Czech Republic, as I understood, also in Ukraine and other parts of the Central European Union, Central and Eastern Europe. So what are maybe the other activities of the other CEE countries? How do they stand on when it comes to foreign policy that would be welcoming women, let's call it this way?
Thank you. Thank you very much for organizing this panel. It's quite still rare to discuss this topic in the region, so I'm very happy to be part of it. And I will also start on a positive note. I think we can clearly see that gender is getting on the foreign policy agenda, for instance, in comparison to the 1990s. And not only into domestic policies, but also into foreign policies. And now with the new trend of feminist foreign policies, we have seen that it has a certainly new attention to it and new visibility, maybe also more revolutionary expectations. And this trend is also quite, has been reaching also Central Europe. For instance, Czech Republic has adopted its first national action plan on the Women, Peace and Security agenda, and already a second one now. And Poland has the first national action plan, also Slovakia. We might hear about it later. So speaking more about the Czech Republic, which I know the most, we have also seen that gender has reached, I mean, there's quite some research I have done, and I can say that we know today that gender equality norms have in some form reached diplomatic relations and development policies, also peace and security with the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And also there's some progress apparent in the new gender equality strategy, which is for the next 10 years. And that includes new commitment for even for some of the overlooked areas, such as cultural diplomacy, which is traditional masculine, the traditional masculine hardcore areas of economic diplomacy and arms trade. These have been entirely absent when it comes to gender mainstreaming. So we all have all this on the paper, and so that's quite a positive news. And I would like to also mention some new initiatives of civil society that concerns mainly addressing the absence of women in foreign policy debates. For instance, there are networking events, there's a new database of women in foreign policy. There's also, in Poland now newly has a Women in International Security, and also some academic research is emerging, even though it is quite limited to few individuals. So at first sight, there are some shifts towards more pro-gender foreign policy. However, if we if we dig deeper and if we apply a more critical eye and look into these policies and to their implementation, and how these are designed, whether these are designed through inclusive process, whether they address the workings of power and so on. And also if we speak of feminist foreign policy, if they do recognize the local feminisms, if governments actually ask local women how feminist policies should look like in their view, so that then it becomes a little bit more problematic for the Central European countries. Also, if we look at the institutional foundation in diplomacy, the Czech foreign policy, for instance, has quite a low percentage of women diplomats. It's between 12 to 18%. It was 18% in 2020, but there's quite a high number of the middle management of the directors, as the deputy director, as Ulrika Grandin said, you have a problem with the middle management. So the middle management is 40% here, but there is no top women in the top management of the ministry, of the Czech ministry. And we also never had any, we never had a female foreign minister. Slovakia briefly had one, and Poland briefly had one. So this is where it kind of becomes a little bit problematic. And these new policies can be seen as a good starting point. They do reflect some feminist principles that the gender norms are based on. But at the same time, they're the product of the domestic politics and of, as already touched upon by the State Secretary, of the domestic governments. The governments adopt international commitments into policies.
and these governments are conservative. The starting conditions are very different to that of Sweden, who is considered a gender champion. So the Central European countries still haven't embraced gender equality agenda sufficiently. We have deeply embedded gender stereotypes. There's culture of sexism. In many ways, there's this need to control women's bodies through restriction of reproductive and sexual health rights, as we now see in Poland and Slovakia. We might get to discuss that. It's quite concerning these days. So the gender equality agenda is not popular here. It is marginalized and even resisted. And what is quite different to Sweden also, we don't have much feminist civil society that focuses on foreign policy. I have researched that there are different reasons to it, but there is really there's no networks, no NGOs, always very few individuals in Poland, Slovakia, Czech Republic that I have spoke to feminists. There's really no bottom-up advocacy for gendering foreign policy. So I was trying to say at the beginning, from my introductory words, so I was trying to say that it is a success that there are gender equality policies, and foreign policy is better than having gender-blind foreign policy, of course, but it's important to apply critical lens to be able to make some advances. And I'll look forward to hear more on for example, on the Swedish examples. How to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much for making this point, for also picturing how it is that it's not really just the bottom up an issue, but also the not only the top down, but also the bottom up, that the civil society is not as active as perhaps in Nordic country. That's also an element, and that, as State Secretary mentioned, also as Míla is mentioning, that how the society perceive the issue, that much more difficult it is to do something on it in such policies such as the foreign one. But still, a lot is been going on, and I think this is going to be the spot for State Secretary to address it, because really last year there was a first. Was it last year or this year? I may be wrong. The first week for women, and then out of that, there has been quite an extended discussion. A strategy for advancing the human resources was created. From 1st of November, Slovakia even has a coordinator for diversity inclusion, which again, we're not really much calling as a feminist coordinator. Nevertheless, her agenda, I'm pretty sure, advances those topics. So, Ms. State Secretary, let me give you the floor to explain really what's been going on, and I think very much under your supervision, which we all appreciate, I have to say here.
Thank you very much. You mentioned a lot, but maybe I would like to start with saying that I feel it as a major paradox that we are, in our case, in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we are speaking about the majority as it would be minority. So it's a real paradox, because a number of employees in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is around 50% of women, even a little bit higher in the headquarters or abroad. So, but question is really that if women have access to the decision-making positions and they can influence the policy. And here I would say that what is very important is the political leadership. And I must say that Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ivan Korčok, has a strong understanding for this agenda, for this issue. And so the political will to do something with this and to address these issues is very important. And really that sets the framework and sets the possibilities and opportunities to do something. So, and I can gladly say that we managed to increase the number of women in decision-making positions. Also, we increased the percentage of women ambassadors. Okay, let's be frank, from 10% to 15%, but in the EU or in G20, as we could see on the screen, is not such a big difference, right? So it's a work in progress, and I think trend here is very, very important, that the employees feel that there is certain policy applied. What we have done this year, and that was the first time historically, you mentioned that, Lucia, it was the week of women in diplomacy, a small revolution in the ministry, but it was really the robust program the whole week. We have tried to build awareness at the ministry and also in society in Slovakia, that what has been done, like in the development assistance agenda, women and development assistance agenda, women and international organizations, where Slovakia has been engaged, in what areas we have been engaged, and we are complied with. Also, we had quite public discussions about women in international politics, in business and innovation and science. What is also important, that part of that week was internal discussion within the ministry. So all women and men could discuss that, what are the conditions of work, what should be improved, and we really would like to see this week of women in diplomacy. We would like to make tradition of it, so hopefully in March we will have another one. But also we not to send a signal that only during that week we pay attention to this agenda. No. That's there has been a follow-up of different discussions during this week, and we are now working on career development guidelines. We also are in the process to upgrade the Foreign Service Act. So from that, especially from that internal discussion, a lot of suggestions, a lot of proposals were brought to the political management, and we are trying to deal with all questions step by step. And also, as it was mentioned, by November 1st, we have a coordinator for gender equality, diversity, and inclusion. It's a position and a new position in the structure of the ministry. And I very much hope that the person who is going to be this coordinator, or who is the coordinator already, will orchestrate this work and this agenda in the ministry. And first, maybe to do the overall assessment of the state of play, and then to listen to different suggestions, because this is not only role of that coordinator. This is the whole of the ministry exercise in headquarters and also abroad at the embassies. And if not, it will not be inclusive, and it will not be authentic. And also the last thing what I would like to say is that what is really need to develop an accountability framework against which progress will be tracked. So we will think about concrete objectives and metrics. We will evaluate the progress on a regular basis. And maybe the traditional, I hope very much that it will be tradition, that the week of women in diplomacy every year will be a good platform for it to discuss these issues. Thank you.
And to extend this, what we are talking, there have been a couple of questions which we received in advance, and they are becoming quite concrete. And I'm talking about the challenges. You've mentioned that the coordinator for gender equality that started to work 1st November, she will be looking into the state of play, and I'm pretty sure there is quite extended work ahead for her. But do you yourself already see the main challenges of women? And I'm just going to I'm wondering, from your experience, from the internal structural experience, you yourself been at Post, you've been an ambassador for many years. So from that point of view, I would like to know and to talk about the challenges. What I've read, what I've heard, also from the others. There are a couple of things. Of course, the question of care that Katarzyna at the beginning brought up is an important. Only recently, Slovak ambassadors don't need to quit their post when they are pregnant and giving birth. This is already changed, and it took many years. Now it's fine. They can stay being ambassadors and giving birth, for instance. But there are still quite like little things, little major. For instance, if there is a women ambassador at Post, she only can get some extra money for her partner, or the man for her partner. It cannot be for instance, for a grandparent. If there is a child, the money are getting significantly cut. For instance, that's kind of a care part. And then when we are talking about the issue with more than 50% women in the ministry and not enough at the top level, the question that we also received in advance is that how it is possible that still ambassadors are being appointed, that whether there is a possibility for a little bit more transparent or inclusive appointment or selection of ambassadors, because then we are ending up with 75% men being ambassadors appointed. Of course, there is a certain selection process, but not very much functional. So the challenges is my question over here.
Yeah, I think there are many challenges. Maybe I will start with the key challenge is to change the mindset and to sensitivize this topic, really, because as I said, very honestly, we are at the beginning, and not everything goes and could happen from one day to another. Some concrete steps have already been implemented, but the sensitization is very, very important. That it is really about the change of to have a modern ministry, and about the change of the corporate culture with the mutual respect and conditions for everybody and equal opportunities. So I think it was before the summer we adopted new strategy for human resources management, because we felt very strongly in the management of the ministry that we need to look at it and to modernize, to update some rules. And you mentioned the maternity leave, or the possibility to deliver abroad. So these are not small steps, but very concrete steps. And I think that's why I said that the progress has to be monitored, and we have to have some accountability culture in the ministry, that somebody would measure the progress and would follow that what needs to be done, what was promised, what needs to be done. The selection of ambassadors, that's a completely another huge topic. Yes. Because it's about the whole policy, how ambassadors are appointed. But recently there are some posts where women were appointed, like to Brussels, to the European Union, to the ambassador to the EU. So even to stronger positions among the ambassadorial posts in foreign service. Rome, for example, another good example. So yes, slowly, step by step, but commitment, sensitization, and the communication to in the ministry is very important.
And keeping a track, as you said. And let's go to Sweden. And the question again is quite similar, because I'm wondering how the challenges have changed. So 7 years ago, I believe the women in diplomacy, in Swedish diplomacy, might have been facing a different kind of challenge that they do today. So I wonder how that progressed, and also how you measured it, because if Slovakia is thinking about the accountability, about the ways how to measure such progress, how do you do that in Sweden?
Well, thank you. And of course, as you say, when we launched the feminist foreign policy, it was top down, actually. As you said, it was our then foreign minister, Margot Wallström, who launched the term and the definition. And then the organization, the Foreign Service, even in Sweden, is quite a conservative organization compared to maybe other workplaces. And there were staff thinking, what is this? What is this supposed to mean? And so on. So there were reactions in the ministry and also elsewhere. But what the then state secretary did that I think was quite clever, and it seems like you're doing a similar process, is to engage the staff in the feminist foreign policy. So she sent a letter to all staff, all the embassies and all the units, asking them if you were to come up with ideas on a feminist foreign policy, what would that be? What would be the work you would prioritize, and what do you think is important, and so on? And then you create an ownership, and the staff felt that they were on board. They were part of the thinking of the feminist foreign policy. And all these suggestions that came in then from the embassies and the units were collected and then sorted out in the first action plan for the feminist foreign policy. So we have an action plan. It's actually for the whole period of the mandate for the government, but it's also yearly, on a yearly basis. So that's how we follow up the feminist foreign policy. We set up targets. I should be frank, and I mean, there are wide goals and wide targets, and maybe not so easy to measure. The measurement is more of a qualitative basis, not so much the quantitative. But of course, if you do things internally, you can more count on how many women are employed and so on. So there are things we could do more to quantify how we follow up. So I think that's a lesson we have taken from our policy, because it started out as a political vision, and then by and by we started to create a system, so to say. So to have a system in place from the start, accountability, I think that's a very good idea, and that would be a better start than what we have. But we usually talk about for things that are essential for any, I think, organizational change. And that's, of course, the political leadership. You have to have a leader that wants to do it. And in this case, we had that. And also, I'm sure it's the same in Slovakia, but then the diplomatic service, if the foreign minister wants something, he or she will get it. So they will follow if that's the leadership. And then, of course, the ownership, we talked a little bit about that to get the staff on board. And I think especially the journey for some of the male ambassadors being out in countries saying that, why should I have a feminist perspective on nuclear negotiations? That seems ridiculous. But then when they were forced and they put those kind of glasses on, they kind of enjoyed it. So they were some of the ones enjoying it the most, because they were kind of a forefront figure, especially among male and female colleagues, because they were men talking about feminism. So these reactions that can be strong on feminism is also a door opener. Of course, you have to be prepared to discuss it, but it's a door opener. And then when, as I said before, when we say that it's just about women's and girls' rights, resources, etc., you come to a dialogue. So I think sometimes you have to have those words to create the discussion and debate and the dialogue, and to create change. Because if we had said that we would have a foreign policy with a gender perspective. I don't think anyone would have been especially interested or thought it was a new idea. So words are important. And the two other things we talk about is, of course, the resources. We have focal points for gender equality or feminist foreign policy in all our embassies and in all our units. And they're just focal points. They don't have to work with it on a daily basis, but they kind of the person to go to, and they learn a little bit more about it. We encouraged young men to be the focal points. It's more women than men still, and girls and boys that wants to work with the issue. But we have a guy in our team now, so we're very happy. So now it's 1 of 3 at least. And then the fourth thing is to get it into the steering documents, the regular budget, the regular action plans, or whatever steering documents you have in the ministry or the organizations. So those are some of the kind of things we have been working with, and to really remind us on what we're doing. I'm not sure that answered the question, but
slightly. And then just to kind of wrap it up with the challenges that the women are currently facing. So, for instance, how do women ambassadors or women that are working in Swedish diplomacy are feeling now after almost 7 years of having this kind of push or equalizing, let's call it. In the level, what do they face now, or where do you maybe see that, okay, we still should kind of turn it up a little higher?
Yeah, I think, I mean, to be frank, it was quite a large representation of women already when the feminist foreign policy. So I don't think the feminist foreign policy in Sweden has made the ambassador raise that. I mean, they have been raised for sure, but it was quite a large amount female ambassadors from the start. But I mean, I think it's more, as I said, the male ambassadors have maybe gone through a larger change than the women ambassadors in a way, and also the women ambassadors and the heads of unit or all people working with these issues have felt that finally we have support from the political leadership. This issue is important. Maybe it was just someone working with it as a part of a portfolio, but now it's all over the place. So it's really seen as an important issue, and they know that they will be credited by the political leadership if they do it. So I think the change is that it's really come to the center. But this was also in a time where the Me Too movement was coming. So the whole society kind of opened their eyes to a structural change. So it's kind of parallel with eye-opening things. And I must say the young men and women, and then I think especially of the young men, they are very into feminism and what they can do. So I think we really have to support the young generation here. Often they seem to be the ones doing the change, of course.
Yeah,
I'm not sure that answered the question either.
That's absolutely answered the question. And also thank you for bringing up the male part and the male's challenges, because now I think this is quite relevant also for Slovakia, for other Central European countries, that there are challenges for women, maybe quite practical, but in order to pass that development, the other half will have to come along as well. Míla Sullivan, kind of to give it some kind of head in here, we've mentioned the challenges that are that women in diplomacy are facing when it comes to their employment, when it comes to being really accepted within still predominantly a male type of job. We mentioned care-related, job-related kind of balance that they have to come along. Are there any other elements that are coming along that are being mentioned that really once trying to equalize women and male in the structures of foreign policy, where the Central European countries, in your opinion, should really speed it up?
Thank you. I think I will speak quite similar as a state secretary. The situation, if I look at the Czech Republic, maybe I start with the broader, taking the broader perspective. I think that if we want to have more women diplomats, it also means having more research on international relations, on feminist research. We need to have some. We need to have gender audits. We need to have the data. Where are the gaps? So I think I can start with my own profession, actually, which is another sphere. We do need some research foundation to understand the absence of women, and it is only recently that the women in diplomacy subject has been taken on, including somebody mentioned also the spouses, the role of spouses. There's actually a group of Swedish academics and Czech academics that are working on really interesting research in this area. And so I think it's really, we need the research, and it's only emerging. There's feminist international relations is still quite absent. It's a very masculine field in Central Europe. In Poland, Slovakia, in the Czech Republic. I did just recently some research with my colleague from based in the UK, Kateřina Kulišová, and it's about to be published on feminist IR in Europe. And we did some interviews also. For instance, in Poland, we received some feedback that scholars only take on feminism when they study IR. International relations only when they have established career, because of the stigma that it has in the public debate. So this is quite in Central Europe. It's not ideal to it can affect your career basically, or the way you get funding and all this. And it's quite uneven, the flow of knowledge between Western Europe and Central Europe because of the lack of research. Because the main knowledge, feminist knowledge, is produced in Western Europe, so it would be useful to have some more feminist exchanges across Europe and beyond, of course. So that would be the other area that I would add to it. The other, if I could elaborate a little bit on the institutional level. There's quite similar to Slovakia, and we have there's quite a lot of institutional barriers in the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs. My institute did gender audit of MFA, and it revealed many gender issues to be tackled. That's from 2016, that ranging from overtime, preschool childcare for diplomats abroad, also selection procedure for ambassador positions, the status of spouses, and so on. And some of these issues have been formally solved through Foreign Service Act, that was in 2017, such as childbirth abroad, and others remain unaddressed, including those relating to informal practices in the area of selection of ambassadors, career progress, preschool childcare when abroad. That remains an issue because this is related to funding. And legal changes, and that for that we need political support. So I think it's also it is really more efforts are needed on the side of the leadership. Even of course having more women in leadership would also help. At the moment, it's the Czech MFA top management is male, and as one diplomat said recently, she considers diplomacy as a male game because it is really because women are still the main caretakers. They are disadvantaged because of the structural. Because of the way the structures are established, and the institutional culture is still traditional and progress is very slow. But also similar to Slovakia, when we spoke to MFA diplomats, the women don't expect the change to come overnight. Sometimes they're even mention things like they're happy that they no longer have to go to gynecologists before they're posting abroad, because this was recently still the case. So it is bit by bit. There's many excellent feminist-minded individuals in the MFA who are trying to really make some small steps, some progress, and they really push for the agenda. And but of course, the agenda is at the same time constantly ridiculed. It's not prioritized, and it is difficult for everyone. It's not. It's still the institutional culture is not ready really for it. We need to constantly work on it, raising awareness like through these events, I think, and international cooperation and so on. See more good examples of good practice and so on. I think it's quite useful to discuss it today like this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for mentioning this. And also, I mean, I got shivers hearing about the gynecologist before the post. This is really extraordinary requirement, I have to say. So we went through challenges. We went through items that women have to face in structure in infrastructure of the foreign policy, but let's also look. We were at the beginning saying that it's the feminist foreign policy. It's kind of an inward element, and it also definitely has some kind of outward elements, and how to incorporate this mindset of inclusiveness also into the actions of the foreign policy. This we've already talked about the humanitarian development types of policies now that is changing in economical as well. So this is another very big topic. If we talk, Míla, let's go with you. If we talk about these elements, do you see them being implemented in any of the foreign actions of the Central European countries, or which do you think are working, which might be also working as an inspiration for others?
If we speak about the policies like in the women, peace and security policies or development cooperation, they're in it. I think this is where really this is where we have the real challenges. Very often these policies are declaratory and they're not implemented. Our research shows that the Polish NAP has not been implemented, and it's not really known whether there will be a second NAP or because it has already expired. And so concerning the Czech Republic, there are clear gaps between policy and practice. Again, these commitments are often declaratory. They're already quite vague text in the policy document, so there's no further guidance on how to work with it in practice. And at the end, the agenda is sidelined and marginalized. I think the example I would use is in development cooperation, which has been going on since 2010. The first gender mainstreaming started around 2009. And it's still the same, hasn't changed since. There's this project documentation, which we have one brief mentioning of gender equality. There's one sentence which can be even avoided. It can be ignored because you can just write one sentence, and this is really happening. So the gender is not really. My colleague did a research of 96 projects, and this is what was the result, that the phrases are replaced with phrases on gender neutrality or anti-discrimination. So this, but the problem is that the way it is set up by the MFA, because NGOs who apply for big grants, for instance, to Canada or Sweden, they do know how to include gender in a better way, because they wouldn't get the grant otherwise. But because the MFA doesn't ask, they don't waste their time, basically. And so I think also there's no common practice such as conducting a gender analysis by the foreign offices. which could provide the Czech delegation with, some important information that could be used by the delegation. If the minister comes, he could meet with the grassroots women. I think this is quite common probably for Sweden. And is this listening of their feminisms and how they, what they need to, for instance, very often speaking to local women, you will find out that it's the economic empowerment and social well-being of their societies that is their concern. And it's not like when I did research in Ukraine where all the money is going for military and the war economy, and it takes away from the finances from the social sphere and from the feminized professions. So I think that listening to more the local voices of women is very important, and this is very much missing. And even though the second Czech night was very inclusive, there was still no time, or I'm not sure why, but there was no discussions with local women's groups. There's no things like, for example, Ireland does a lot of twin projects with countries through development cooperation and WP's agenda. But this is something that is not really the case in the Czech MFA. So I'll leave it at that.
Do you think also that, because you said that the civil society is not that strong in the Central European Union, Central Europe, I'm bringing up European Union all the time, Central Europe. So how do you think that this would help if such activities would, I mean, there are quite obvious thing that, okay, if there's a strong single society, then the push will be harder. But if there is something existing, and it is maybe in some smaller numbers, maybe even some media, we actually got this kind of question: how can those organization media support the feminist policies?
You mean the Czech ones, or
or elsewhere?
I think it's about demanding from the ministry that acting like a watchdog and demanding that these demands are actually fulfilled, because at the moment it is quite declaratory, and the feminist civil society in Central Europe is focusing domestically because there are so many issues to be tackled. I mean, because as I mentioned, there's not much expertise on foreign policy. That's one of the answers too, that feminist organizations don't have the expertise because it is quite a conservative, quite traditional masculine discipline. And there's NGOs and development NGOs that there has been some efforts to, there's a gender working group and development cooperation platform. They do try to engage, try to push for things, but there's so many other, they always say there's so many other cross-cutting issues. This is one of them. And I think it's a little bit has to do with the way the society is at the moment, not as open, doesn't consider it as a crucial issue. I think with the case of Sweden, where we have heard of the Me Too movement, I thought it was quite really, I wrote it down, this about the structural, about opened up for structural change. So this hasn't reached us yet. I think we are having a little bit of a Me Too movement, Me Too moment.
But quite a slow one over here. Yes. Let's connect it also to Sweden, if I can, because the question remains, like, what are these practical examples of implementation of the feminist foreign policy in the foreign external activities?
Well, I think it was quite interesting to hear about analysis and about dialogues with women's rights organizations, because I think that's some of the issues that we've been working with. I mean, we have all the countries we work with, we do our own human rights reports on those countries. And in those reports, women's and girls' human rights is a big central issue. And once we have those reports on the different countries, we have the analysis, if you want, to see where are the areas where our embassy could, I mean, as much as they can, being an embassy in another country, but that's their job, right? To work with these issues and to see where maybe there's a lack of legislation, or there are different policies that we could try to cooperate on, and so on. So the analysis of the different countries. And then women's rights organizations have been key to the Swedish feminist foreign policy, both in terms of developing it here in Sweden. We have dialogues with CSOs and feminist movements on what they think is important, what they see, and of course we cannot do everything they want. We have different roles, right? But at least we have a dialogue and we listen to each other, and they're more on the progressive side, on what is out there, and they have their own kind of relations, of course, with their countries and so on. But also in the embassies, I mean, it's almost obligatory to have relations with networks of women's rights organizations and women's human rights activists in the country for a Swedish embassy, and to really get their analysis and information and what is happening and what are the lacks and so on. And this is also something we took forward then to when we were in the UN Security Council. We let women's organizations brief the Security Council, because apparently that hadn't happened really a lot before. And also in other organizations to get them to have a voice. So that's a really important part of the feminist foreign policy, to create a platform, and also to let the embassy be a safe space for women's rights movements and organizations. And that's really important, not to put them in danger. I mean, in some countries that could be a dangerous thing, but to really see to it that it's a safe space and a safe spot for them. And this is also part of, if we talk in detail, of the feminist foreign policy to make the embassies also welcoming for men and women. And that, you can think that's a small part, but it's easy things like having different bathrooms or areas to where women and men are separated if they want, and also just the artwork on the walls, not just having male whatever royals or something like that, to have female faces and artists and so on. But of course, other things we're doing is we work a lot within the EU for on these issues, and to try to push EU for the representation issues also in the EU Foreign Service, which is, as we know, quite low, and also in their external work, that they have this perspective. Our development cooperation is a good source of activities, of course, because there's money there, and we try to have a lot of projects directed to gender equality, but also to integrate gender equality into and there I think the economic sectors are the ones lacking most behind in development cooperation. In the social sectors, it's more present, but in the economic sectors, it's so we're working on that. And also, I mean, new issues is climate and gender. It's very the connections between those issues. But then last but not least, I mean, the pandemic and the rebuilding after the pandemic. And we see worrying signs that the big international financial institutions, if they don't have a gender perspective from the start or a gender marker, so we have to really collaborate, I think, all the like-minded countries to get those large institutions to really get gender and social protection in at the start. And then also those kind of worrying signs of the backlash on gender equality language in different international negotiations.
This was my next question. Yes, go ahead.
And I mean, it's getting, unfortunately, more and more organized from certain countries and actors, but we're also quite organized on the like-minded side to really, I mean, these are the fundamental values of the EU, for example. And so we're quite organized back, and it's up to, I think, the minority to say why it shouldn't be there and so on. So a lot of things to work with, but good
yes.
work.
Good work, and quite a lot ahead as well. Ms. State Secretary, I will ask kind of upside down to you, because yes, we mentioned that there are some activities. We are talking that it needs to be implemented. It's going to take some time. But my question is that what type of support would maybe the Slovak Ministry of Foreign Affairs need in order to ensure this bottom-up approach? We have a lot of participants. Many of them are diplomats themselves, activists, or want to be active in that area. Do you see some space for people, for men, for women, to be a little bit more active? That would maybe also help you in your goals.
Thank you very much for this question. Yes, we would need some help and some inspiration, of course, but I would like to say also that about the external factor of feminist diplomacy, that if we want to be credible at home, we need to be engaged also in the foreign policy activities. And as it was mentioned here several times, the official development assistance is a very good tool how to mainstream the gender equality agenda, and we have been doing that because in the official development assistance, the education, healthcare, and women's economic empowerment are the priorities. And in the ODA, Slovakia has 3 horizontal topics which are mainstream. One of them is gender equality, second, climate changes, and third, human rights. So really, in all programs, we have been trying to mainstream the gender equality agenda. But back to your question, yes, we would need help and inspiration and some good practice examples. And so this is why it is very important to have the international network. I very much welcome this discussion, but also for our coordinator, I very much hope that she could outreach to the similar positions in other ministries of foreign affairs, and to listen to them, that what works, what doesn't work, how to sequence the steps to improve the situation and to empower the position of women. So that is one. Another way is to have a dialogue with the civil society back at home. It's not, as I said in the beginning, it's not only the issue or agenda of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In case of Slovakia, and I believe also other countries in Central Europe, it is the sensitization of society as such, and there have been many civil society organizations in Slovakia. We have quite well developed a civil society sector, so we are, as a ministry, we are open to dialogue with the civil society, but also horizontally within the other line ministries in the administration, and with the private sector as well. That's important, that it's a whole of society exercise. One last thing what I would like to say, and I would like to refer to Madeleine Albright, and you know all what I'm going to say. It's about the solidarity among women, and because there is a place in the hell where all women who do not help other women will go. So because I feel this is also one very strong element that to be credible and to go forward, to reach to make progress, we need have understanding, at least among women, that this is an issue and this is the agenda for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you for this words also. And I'm going to connect this because we get one question in advance, which I was kind of planning to ask you. Whether you think that openly proclaiming yourself a feminist may hinder you from advancing in your career? I think that's in Slovakia might be a question. What do you say?
Well, I do not have the answer for this. Really, we will see. As I said, the feminist anything feminist doesn't fly so far in Slovakia. So we have to be careful how to package the agenda, how to frame it. But we will find a way.
We will, and especially when women leaders. We have Angela Merkel and many others, they are standing in line, especially when they are leaving their position. That's easier to say it, but proclaim themselves as feminists. One very last, we have about 3 minutes, one very last question for each of you, the same. If you could pick one point which you would, if you are the Minister of Foreign Affairs yourself, to pick one to really execute in order to promote and advance the women in diplomacy, what would that be? What this particular element do you think could be quite effective? Let's start with Ulrika Grandin, because I think you already kind of implemented many. So what do you think that works really the best and is quite effective?
Well, I mean, I would probably turn the question to more of the global arena, because I think we have a lot of feminist diplomats in Sweden now. Not to say that this is forever. We have to work with it, and if I had to say something to our ministers, equal pay for equal male and female staff, because we haven't reached that. But broadly, I think, and also what State Secretary said, the word feminist, I think if we have contributed to something, I think it's a little bit to make the word feminist and feminism more clear and more not so dangerous. I at least I hope so, and that it's clear that it's about women's and girls' rights. And I think we kind of made an effort there. And also, I'm very happy that, I mean, the Secretary General of the United Nations, he's a proclaimed feminist, and this is the world leader, right? And so if he can be a feminist, I think we all can be. And also, he is working a lot to reform the UN and his staff, and to really work with these issues. So I think let's all be feminists. It's not that dangerous.
Thank you so much for this. Míla O'Sullivan.
Yes, I think let's all be feminist, because I think the word is kind of coming slowly to this region. I think the more we use it, it becomes normalized. Also, we can see, when you mentioned the Secretary General of the UN, we can see that the new plan of the UN for recovering from COVID pandemics is called feminist, so that even the UN has just started to use the word. So it is really just to start using it, like the Sweden was the leader here, and I think it might become quite normal in the normal narrative, maybe a little bit more slowly in this region, but I wouldn't avoid it.
Thank you for encouraging this. State Secretary?
Well, I think it would be
a tricky one, because I understand it's a complex thing, and we talked about it, and there are plenty of elements, but
yeah, maybe I would say mindset, changing the mindset. It is not only about women.
Yeah.
And solidarity, understanding, mutual respect.
That's a good one. Thank you very much for this. Thank you to our audience, because we've been receiving some questions I was trying to incorporate when I've heard that the topic is on. I didn't include it anymore, but then there were a couple that I put in. Thank you so much for this. Thank you to our speakers, obviously, for this great panel. And I would be very much glad to meet you in person. And I hope this is going to finally happen soon. And we will also continue with this topic. topic, State Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs, Ingrid Brocková. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Ulrika Grandin, Deputy Director of the Coordination Team of the Feminist Foreign Policy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Sweden.
Thank you so much, and very nice to meet you all. Thank you.
Thank you. It's always such a pleasant meeting moderating this kind of event, I have to say. And obviously, Míla O'Sullivan, researcher from the Institute of International Relations, thank you for bringing the academic and really an experienced point of view from Prague.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for this feminist panel. Thank you.
Thank you for the feminist panel, and thank you to also Heinrich-Stiftung Kateřina Boťová for being with us, to EuroPolicy and EURACTIV for bringing this event together. We hope you will continue to support us, watching us, reading us, and listening to us, because EURACTIV is really trying to push the topic further on, and we hope to do it in the future as well. Thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon, evening, and be all feminist. What can I say? Have a good